You might assume that 19th-century whaling was primarily a story of rugged seamanship, brave sailors, and epic battles against sea monsters in the open Pacific. That sounds logical if your understanding comes from classic literature or old nautical tales. But the reality is that whaling was a cold, highly calculated branch of high-finance venture capital, engineered from comfortable brick counting houses on the cobblestone streets of New Bedford, Massachusetts. Understanding how this system operated reveals something much bigger about the birth of modern American corporate capitalism. In the 1850s, New Bedford was not just a busy fishing harbor, it was officially the wealthiest city per capita on planet Earth. The entire city functioned like a hyper-specialized financial exchange. A single whaling voyage required an enormous upfront capital investment, took up to 4 years to produce a return, and carried a high probability of total catastrophic loss. Ships sank in Arctic ice, were destroyed by typhoons, or spent years scouring barren seas without finding a single whale. Yet, despite these terrifying operational risks, investors in New Bedford were consistently generating double-digit annual returns on their capital. To understand how they pulled this off, you have to look beneath the wooden hulls and canvas sails and examine the underlying financial architecture. The money did not flow from simple fishing operations. It flowed from a sophisticated system of risk fractionalization, asymmetric equity compensation, and an internal retail monopoly that guaranteed the shipowner's profit before a single barrel of oil was brought back to port. When an investor in 1850 wanted to launch a whaling expedition, they did not buy a ship outright and hire a crew on monthly wages. That would have concentrated far too much risk on one person's balance sheet. Instead, the industry operated on a fractional syndicate system. A specialized entrepreneur, known as a managing agent, would buy or build a heavy timber bark, typically between 300 and 400 tons, and divide the ownership of the vessel into fractional shares, usually 16ths, 32nds, or 64ths. According to surviving outfitting registers and investor ledgers preserved at the New Bedford Whaling Museum, outfitting a single vessel like the famous bark Charles W. Morgan in the 1850s required between $20,000 and $40,000. In modern purchasing power, that translates to an upfront capital outlay of roughly $800,000 to $1.5 million. This money went into structural preparation and long-term supplies. The hull had to be sheathed in expensive copper plates to prevent tropical shipworms from destroying the wood during multi-year deployments in the Pacific. The ship needed thousands of iron hoops and oak staves to build hundreds of storage barrels, along with tons of hardtack, salted beef, pork, fresh water, trypots for boiling blubber, harpoons, and lighter whaleboats. No single smart investor put all their money into one vessel. An agent like Jonathan Bourne Jr., one of the most successful whaling managers in history, held fractional shares in over 50 different vessels simultaneously. If one ship was crushed in the ice off Alaska, it represented only a tiny fraction of an investor's overall portfolio. The other 49 ships out on the ocean spread the risk, ensuring that a single disaster could not wipe out the syndicate. Once the capital was raised and the ship was outfitted, the managing agent faced a major operational challenge. They had to send a vessel worth a fortune, carrying 25 to 30 men, to the opposite side of the globe for 3 to 4 years without any direct communication, modern navigation aids, or oversight. If you paid the crew a fixed monthly wage, you created a massive principal-agent problem. A crew paid by the hour or month has zero financial incentive to risk their lives throwing a harpoon at an 80-ton sperm whale in a flimsy wooden boat. In fact, fixed wages would incentivize sailors to avoid whales entirely, stretch out the voyage, and consume the ship's rations while doing as little work as possible. To solve this, the whaling industry developed a pure equity compensation structure known as the lay system. Sailors on an American whaler were not paid a salary. They did not earn a single cent in hourly or monthly wages. Instead, every individual on board signed a contract granting them a fractional share or lay of the net proceeds of the oil and bone brought back at the end of the voyage. The size of your lay depended entirely on your skill, experience, and rank inside the ship's hierarchy. The captain, who bore ultimate responsibility for navigation, crew discipline, and finding whales, typically received a lay between 1/8 and 1/12 of the entire catch. The first mate might receive 1/20th, while skilled specialists like boat steerers and harpooners earned between 1/75th and 1/90th. At the bottom of the structure were the green hands, inexperienced farm boys, immigrants, and runaway teenagers recruited from coastal cities who knew nothing about the ocean. A green hand's lay was typically set at 175th or even 1/200th of the net catch. On paper, this sounds like an amazingly fair and progressive economic model. It looks like an early precursor to Silicon Valley startup equity, where every employee gets a piece of the upside and aligns their personal interest with the success of the enterprise. That is how the managing agents marketed it to young men across New England. But in practice, the mathematical reality of the lay system was stacked overwhelmingly in favor of the shipowner. To see why, you have to look at how a sailor's final pay was calculated when the ship returned to New Bedford after 3 or 4 brutal years at sea. The gross earnings of the voyage were calculated by taking the total barrels of sperm oil, whale oil, and pounds of whale bone brought back and multiplying them by the prevailing market prices at the dock. But before a sailor saw a single penny of their fractional lay, the managing agent deducted a massive list of fees, expenses, and personal debts from that individual's account. This was where the shipowners operated an internal retail monopoly known as the slop chest. Before leaving port, a young green hand almost never had the cash required to buy the heavy canvas clothes, oilskins, sea goods, bedding, and tools needed for a multi-year voyage. The managing agent would gladly provide an advance in cash or supply these items directly from the ship's store, charging the expense to the sailor's personal ledger against their future lay. The catch was that these items were not sold at wholesale or even market prices. According to surviving crew account books from 1850s New Bedford outfitters, goods sold from the slop chest were routinely marked up by 50 to 100% above retail price. Furthermore, any cash advance given to the sailor before departure carried an immediate interest charge, often between 10 and 25%. If a sailor wanted tobacco, soap, replacement boots, or extra clothes during a 4-year voyage, they had to buy them directly from the captain's slop chest at whatever price the captain decided to charge. The financial consequences for the low-ranking crew were devastating. Consider a simplified calculation based on actual historical crew accounting ledgers. Imagine a 4-year voyage that generated $50,000 in total oil sales, a respectable return for the era. A green hand with a 180th lay was nominally entitled to 180th of that $50,000, which comes out to roughly $277. Adjusting for modern values, $277 in 1850 represented around $9,000 to $10,000 today. That might sound like a modest but acceptable sum for a young worker in the 1850s. However, from that $277, the agent subtracted the green hand's initial outfitting debt, the high-interest advance, the marked-up purchases from the slop chest over 48 months, fitting fees, discharge fees, and even a percentage charge for oil leakage during transport. After all those deductions were applied, it was common for a green hand to step off the ship after 4 years of back-breaking, life-threatening labor with a net payout of less than $20. In many documented cases, the math was even worse. The sailors' total debts to the slop chest exceeded their fractional lay, meaning they finished a 4-year voyage owing money to the shipowner. That sounds like bad news for the worker. It was, but for the shipowners and managing agents in New Bedford, it was a financial masterpiece. By using the lay system combined with slop chest debt, ship owners effectively shifted almost the entire downside financial risk of a bad voyage onto the crew. If a ship returned half empty after 3 years because whales were scarce, the shipowner lost some capital, but they owed the crew virtually nothing in labor costs. The sailors had provided 3 years of intense physical labor for free, and their accumulated slop chest debts helped offset the agent's outfitting costs. If the voyage was a massive success, the captain and managing agents captured the vast majority of the profit windfall, while the green hands payouts remained severely suppressed by inflated expense deductions. To understand why investors were willing to deploy millions of dollars into this system, you have to look at what they were actually harvesting. Whales were not hunted for meat. They were hunted because they were walking, swimming oil refineries that contained the highest grade industrial lubricants and illuminants known to 19th century science. The Industrial Revolution in Europe and Northern American states was accelerating at a breakneck pace in the 1850s. Massive textile mills, iron foundries, and steam engines required constant lubrication to prevent high-speed metal gears from seizing up. Standard animal fats like tallow or vegetable oils deteriorated quickly under high heat and friction. Sperm whale oil, harvested specifically from the head cavity and blubber of the sperm whale, possessed unique chemical properties. It maintained its viscosity at extreme temperatures, did not corrode metals, and produced a clear, odorless, smoke-free light when burned in lamps. The premier prize was a liquid found inside a massive organ in the head of the sperm whale known as the Spermaceti organ. A single large sperm whale could yield up to 500 gallons of pure liquid spermaceti oil from its head alone. When cooled, this liquid crystallized into a waxy substance used to manufacture the finest candles in the world. In fact, during the 19th century, the standard international unit for measuring light brightness, the candle power, was officially defined by the light emitted from a candle made from a specific weight of New Bedford spermaceti wax. Historical commodity market price sheets from the 1850s reveal a sharp distinction between different whale products. Sperm oil commanded a high premium, selling for anywhere between $1.20 to $1.80 per gallon. In modern terms, that is roughly $40 to $60 per gallon. Ordinary whale oil, harvested from baleen whales like right whales and bowheads, was lower quality and sold for 60 to 80 cents per gallon. It was used primarily for street lighting, soap manufacturing, and miner lamps. The second major revenue stream was whalebone or baleen. Baleen is not actual bone. It is a flexible, durable keratin plate harvested from the upper jaw of baleen whales, which they use to filter krill out of seawater. Before the invention of synthetic plastics or spring steel, baleen was the only material on Earth that was simultaneously light, tough, and flexible when heat molded. It was the essential raw material for 19th century consumer products, used in women's corsets, hoop skirts, buggy whips, umbrella ribs, and collar stays. In the late 1850s, as fashion trends demanded increasingly dramatic hoop skirts, the price of high-grade baleen skyrocketed from 30 cents a pound to over $1 per pound, making a single bowhead whale's baleen yield worth as much as all its oil combined. To see how all these moving economic parts came together in a real-world enterprise, consider the actual documented performance of one of New Bedford's premier managing owners, Jonathan Bourne, Jr., and his flagship vessel, the bark Lagoda. Jonathan Bourne, Jr. was not a sea captain. He was a meticulous accountant and master capitalist who operated out of a modest office on Water Street in New Bedford. Over his 50-year career, Bourne held controlling management interests in 53 distinct whaling vessels, overseeing more than 140 separate voyages. His surviving account ledgers, meticulously archived, offer a clear picture of the returns generated by a top-tier whaling syndicate. In 1860, Bourne outfitted the Lagoda for a multi-year Pacific voyage. The total capital required to outfit the ship, purchase provisions, and prepare the hull was approximately $24,000. Bourne retained a large fraction of the ship's shares for himself and sold the remaining 64th shares to a tight network of local merchants, blacksmiths, sailmakers, and private investors. The Lagoda spent nearly 4 years at sea, tracking sperm whales across the Pacific and Arctic Oceans. When the vessel finally navigated back into New Bedford Harbor in 1864, its hold was crammed with over 2,200 barrels of precious sperm oil and whale oil, alongside thousands of prime baleen. The financial breakdown of that single voyage was staggering. The total gross revenue from the sale of the cargo reached roughly $139,000. Subtracting the initial $24,000 outfitting expense and operational costs, the net profit exceeded $100,000. In modern purchasing power, that single 4-year voyage generated over $3 million in clear net profit on an original capital investment of under $800,000, a return on investment of over 400%. For Jonathan Bourne Jr. and his fractional share syndicate, the voyage of the Lagoda was a massive financial triumph. Dividends were distributed to the 64th share owners, reinforcing New Bedford's status as the per capita wealth capital of America. But when you look down at the individual crew ledgers for that same voyage of the Lagoda, the narrative changes completely. The green hands who had spent 4 years battling freezing gales, suffering from scurvy, pulling heavy oars for hours in pursuit of dangerous whales, and sleeping in damp, cramped forecastle quarters, received almost nothing. After their initial outfit charges, interest on cash advances, and 4 years of inflated slop chest deductions were calculated by Bourne's clerks, multiple sailors walked away with total net earnings under $30. They had provided 4 years of life-threatening physical labor for an average of less than 75 cents per month. This extreme dynamic, enormous investor returns powered by deeply suppressed, debt-leveraged labor costs was the true economic engine of the New Bedford whaling boom. But like many high-margin industries that rely on a single dominant business model, it contained hidden structural vulnerabilities that began surfacing in the late 1850s. The first major problem was a direct result of the industry's own success, overwhaling. Decades of aggressive hunting had severely depleted whale populations in traditional, easily accessible grounds like the Atlantic and South Pacific. To find whales, ships had to push deeper into remote, dangerous waters, particularly the icy seas of the Arctic Ocean.
This shift caused the average duration of a whaling voyage to expand rapidly. In the 1830s, a typical voyage lasted 2 years. By the late 1850s, voyages stretched to 3, 4, or even 5 years. Longer voyages created a compounding negative cost structure. Ships required heavier, more expensive outfitting before leaving port. Wooden hulls suffered greater wear and tear, driving up maintenance costs. Most importantly, long voyages severely eroded the capital efficiency of the managing agents. An investor who had to wait 5 years instead of 2 to realize a return required significantly higher profit margins just to justify the tied-up capital. As voyage lengths increased and net payouts to crew members shrank further, the quality of available labor plummeted. American-born men from New England increasingly refused to sign whaler contracts, recognizing the lay system as a debt trap. Ship owners were forced to rely on inexperienced foreign labor picked up in port stops around the world, Cape Verdeans, Azorians, Pacific Islanders, and desperate men tricked by aggressive recruitment crimps in major ports. Desertion rates exploded. It was common for half a ship's original crew to desert in foreign ports, forcing captains to pay high fees to local recruiters to secure replacement hands just to keep the vessel operational. Then, in late August of 1859, the fatal blow struck from an entirely unexpected direction. An unpretentious former railroad conductor named Edwin Drake struck oil in Titusville, Pennsylvania, drilling down 69 feet into the earth and bringing up crude petroleum. Drake's discovery marked the birth of the modern oil industry. Within a few short years, refining techniques were developed to process crude petroleum into kerosene, a light, clean-burning lamp fuel that could be produced at a tiny fraction of the cost of hunting a sperm whale across the Pacific Ocean. The economic impact on New Bedford was swift and merciless. In 1855, sperm oil was selling for over $1.50 a gallon, underpinned by robust demand for high-end lighting and industrial lubrication. As Pennsylvania Petroleum and refined kerosene flooded the market throughout the 1860s, whale oil prices plummeted. Consumers and factory operators realized they no longer needed to pay exorbitant prices for animal oils extracted from the deep ocean when mineral oil could be pumped directly out of the ground in North America. The Civil War accelerated this downward trajectory. Between 1861 and 1865, Confederate commerce raiders, most notably the steam sloop CSS Shenandoah, systematically targeted Union commercial shipping. The Shenandoah navigated into the Pacific and Arctic Oceans, hunting down defenseless New Bedford whaling fleets. In a single relentless campaign, the Shenandoah captured and burned dozens of Union whalers, destroying millions in dollars in ships and cargo and dealing a devastating shock to New Bedford's managing syndicates. The final physical knockout blow occurred in 1871. A fleet of 33 New Bedford whaling vessels was trapped by an early Arctic ice pack off the coast of Alaska. The crushed, immobilized ships were abandoned by their crews. While all 1,200 sailors were miraculously rescued by nearby vessels without a single loss of life, the financial loss was total. 33 ships, complete with their gear, provisions, and harvested oil, were swallowed by the sea in a single season, wiping out millions in invested capital and permanently breaking New Bedford's dominance over the global lighting trade. When you step back and analyze the rise and fall of the American whaling fleet, the familiar cultural picture of brave mariners chasing ocean monsters dissolves. In its place emerges a much clearer picture of early American financial engineering. New Bedford did not grow rich because its sea captains were braver or luckier than ones from other ports. It grew rich because its managing agents built an early corporate mechanism for managing asymmetric financial risk. They fractionalized high-risk capital assets through syndicate ownership, alignment-based equity contracts, and strict internal retail debt structures that guaranteed enterprise margins even when operational conditions were harsh. The lay system was never really about sharing wealth with sailors. It was about transferring operational exposure away from capital owners and onto a captive labor force. When superior technology in the form of Pennsylvania Petroleum disrupted the commodity and overexploitation depleted the natural resource base, the complex financial framework crumbled rapidly. Whaling was never just an iconic chapter of maritime law. Beneath the surface, it was an early preview of modern corporate capitalism, a system designed to manage risk, capture maximum upside, and turn unpredictable global commodities into concentrated financial wealth.